So welcome. This is the Productivity How to Make Everyday Awesome webinar with Ron Kirsop, the Assistant Director of the Pioneer Library System, which is in Canandaigua, New York. We're thrilled to have Ron here with us this morning because we heard rave reviews of this presentation at the 2015 NYLA conference in Lake Placid. So we're thrilled to have him here this morning, and we're happy that you could join us. We're going to pretty quickly transition into the program this morning, but I just wanted to give a shout out for Ron. I've had the pleasure of working with him for the past year on a statewide project, and he is a highly organized and efficient person who produces high quality work. So we think we're in for a pleasure today. He also has a great sense of humor, so I think you'll enjoy the next hour with Ron. Ron, is that a pretty good introduction of you?
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. Cool. Thanks for all those kind things that you said about me.
They're all true.
All right, cool. All right, hey everybody. Like Rebecca said, I'm Ron Kirsop, and today we're going to talk about productivity. And productivity is kind of a really cool thing that I like to do a lot of research on for a couple different reasons. The first one is through the research I've done, I've kind of figured out that as a society as a whole, we feel pretty unproductive, and it sounds like the results of your survey said the same thing. And a lot of this unproductive feelings comes from the reason, or why comes from discrediting the amount of hard work and practice and sleepless night that those phenoms, those really productive people spend alone with their craft when no one else is around. And we see a lot of people who are productive and we don't see the behind the scenes on it, so we in turn feel a little bit unproductive. Also, one of the big things that comes up a lot is that people think they're busier than they actually are. And what I found through doing my research in productivity is we're not as busy as we think. And we view busyness as more of a virtue, and we're afraid of having unscheduled time, and not being busy feels like we're obsolete. But the idea of busyness comes from the inability to set priorities. Now, in a moment you may be busy, but when you're actually talking to somebody and you ask them, you know, how are you today? And they come up with just busy. I don't really buy that, because most of us, we feel a little overwhelmed, but the big issue is we just don't know how to set the priorities that we have in order to productively finish what we need to finish. So that's kind of what I've been doing with productivity, reading about it a little bit. And today I'm going to cover a few different areas. I'm going to cover some pre-formatted productivity methods that are already out there. You probably heard of some of them. I'm going to talk about some productive habits that are kind of nice to implement your day-to-day lives, your activities. I'm going to talk about some cool tools, your number one productivity tool, and I have comments and discussion at the end, but really we'll be having questions throughout the presentation, so we're going to go on with that. If anyone saw my talk at NYLA on productivity, this is a little different. I had to cut a few things out, but hopefully we'll still cover a lot of ground. And you won't be productivity gurus after this. This is just kind of a taste of a lot of different things that you can, a lot of different areas that you can play around with. There's a lot of areas where you can do a little bit more research, and hopefully you'll learn a little something along the way. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be productivity methods. And these are pre-formatted systems that are out there, and they come to mind, and a lot of people use them. And right off the bat, if anyone knows who this guy is, can you just throw it in the chat box for me? And I've done this presentation probably about 5 times, and no one's ever gotten it. Rebecca, do you have any idea who this is?
Is it your dad?
No. Rebecca. All right, Rebecca just spoke on behalf of all Mid-Hudson Library System. No, it's not my dad. I wish it was my dad, though. My dad's never written a book. This is David Allen, and he wrote the book Getting Things Done. You probably know of that book, or at least you've heard of it. You may recognize him a little better for this one when he was a little nerdier. He didn't have that little chest hair showing on his new cover there. But he is kind of the gold standard of productivity. David Allen's a coach, consultant, public speaker. Many styles mimic what he uses in terms of productivity, and he has a 5-step process that focuses on control and perspective. And like I said, many productivity methods are based off of this, his foundation, and I'm going to cover the 5 steps to his productivity method just to give you a taste of what he talks about, because it is pretty important to understand as we move forward. The first step in David Allen's 5 areas of productivity are capture. And what he means by capture is having some type of trusted in-basket. So throughout the day, a lot of stuff is thrown at us. We get a ton of emails, we get paperwork, we have people telling us stuff that we need to do, we come up with new activities. Anything that has your attention or that comes in needs to have some type of place where you can store it that you know you're going to use it later, or you're going to be able to take it out of that basket and process it. And I'll talk about processing in a second. But this could be an in-basket, this could be a notebook, this could be a voice recorder, it could be your email inbox, whatever it is, as long as it's something that it's going in that you know, that you trust that it's going to be there when you get there, and that you'll be able to organize it a little bit later. And the trusted in-basket is a processing station. It's not a storage bin. A lot of the times I'll have piles of papers kind of pile up on my desk, and I have no intention of really going through those anytime soon, so it acts more like a storage bin rather than a processing station, but that's what you try to avoid with the getting things done method. And the idea is that when you collect these things, a lot of people try to keep them in their head, or they try to remember their to-do lists, or they try to remember what their boss told them that they have to do. And the head is a pretty terrible place to keep that, because your head's meant for having ideas, not necessarily storing them. It's a terrible storage place, and it's awfully leaky. We oftentimes forget a lot of the stuff that we're trying to hold in there on a regular basis, and that's okay. You just need somewhere where you can put it. Another good way to go through a capturing process when we feel a bit overwhelmed, or we feel that super busyness starting to set in, is to do what David Allen calls a mind sweep. Rebecca referred to it as a brain dump at one point too, and if you want to call it a brain dump, that's fine. But essentially what it is sitting down with a whiteboard, a piece of paper, not necessarily your computer. It should be something tangible, something you can write with, because our brains connect to what's coming out of our handwriting a lot more than typing it out. But what a mind sweep is you just get everything out, whether it's little, big, personal, professional, any projects or tasks, anything you're thinking about. Look ahead on the calendar to things you're concerned about. Everything that's in your head you want to dump out and put on a piece of paper so you can organize it a little bit later. Again, because the head's kind of a bad place to keep those things, and that's where we start to get anxious about not being able to complete our projects, is when they're in our head and we don't have a clear path forward. The next step, so after we capture or we do our mind sweep, is to clarify. And this is essentially processing the captured information. And you're going to ask yourself, first off, to clarify, is it actionable? And if it's not actionable, if you can't do anything to move it forward, then it's either going to go into the trash, someday maybe folder, or perhaps it's a reference. And then whatever system you have set in place where you put it in the trash, or you have a someday maybe, perhaps a tickler file, or a reference area, you're going to put it in there. Once you answer, well, let's go yes first. So if it's actionable, is it actionable? Yes. Then you ask yourself a few more questions. Will it take less than 2 minutes? David Allen is really big on looking at tasks and asking yourself, will this take 2 minutes or less? And if it does, you just do it. Because oftentimes we'll get a lot of tasks that'll pile on top of each other, and they will be smaller things, but then they'll kind of grow into bigger things, something that we have to take care of, more of a larger project. And so if it will take 2 minutes or less, you just get it done and get it out of the way. Another question to ask is, what's the next action? So another thing that kind of breeds unproductive behavior is if we have a larger task that we have to do, and it's not really broken up in a clear set of subtasks that we need. And what it becomes is a project, and what I defined as a project is anything that has more than one action. So this idea, if I have on my to-do list, I work with strategic planning a lot with our libraries, and if I just have Geneva Strategic Plan on my to-do list, that's not a task, that's a whole project, and there's a lot of subtasks that are going to fall under that project. So it's really difficult to check something like that off your list unless you have a smaller, more manageable items that you need to do. So you need to break your larger projects down into more manageable pieces by asking yourself, what's the next action that I need to take to further this project or task to completion? Also with clarifying, you have your 3Ds. You either do it, you delegate it to somebody else, or you defer it. Those are pretty important to understand and have a sense of if you can delegate or defer to people. And it's good not to be distracted by the easier tasks. Sometimes when we do that mind sweep and we write everything down, a lot of the easier stuff we'll just want to jump on real quick and take care of. During that collection or the capturing process, you want to make sure you get everything out, and then you don't act on anything and until you get to this clarify stage. Step 3 is organizing, and this is just putting things where they need to go. Trash, tickler file, organize it, reference list. This is putting your next action, the next action next to these items, whether it's a call, meeting, request, if it's pending, if you're waiting for some information. This is when you add it to your priority lists. So just being able to take all the clarification that you did and organize it in a simple, streamlined way is really good. Number 4 is reflecting on it. This is once you do any type of clarification, reflection, if you do any type of mind sweep and clarify it and then you organize it, you want to make sure you check it regularly. So oftentimes what happens is we will feel really good and we'll write out this great plan, and then we will stick it in a filing cabinet and forget all about it. Once you have your trusted system in place, you have to look at it on a regular basis, and you have to look at your list to determine what to do next. Every time you complete an item, you have to go back to your list of things that you have to do. I recommend a weekly review, and so I have my lists of everything that I need to do. A lot of people don't want to deal with it daily, but if you set it so every week you take a look at it and you clean it up, you update everything, you clear your mind, and you take a look at your upcoming projects that you need to accomplish, generally on a weekly basis that works pretty well. A month, that's kind of too long. Daily, that's what I prefer to do, but some people I know don't have the time necessarily to look at this whole process every day. And then his last step is engage, and this is just doing it. Use your system to take the appropriate actions with confidence. This is focusing on the task, and I'm going to talk about focus a little bit more. And planning doesn't really help at all if you don't actually do your task. So that was David Allen getting things done, the 5 steps that he has. That's capture, clarify, organize, reflect, and engage. Now that's a lot of information, and he has a lot of stuff in his book. I highly recommend taking a look at that. If you Google David Allen getting things done, you can look at kind of a brief description of everything that he puts into those 5 steps too. That gives a little bit more detail than what I gave here, and it has a few more examples to it. So I definitely recommend that one. Moving on to the next productivity method that I like to talk about it's called Pomodoro. And this was invented in the early 90s, and it was invented by a developer, an entrepreneur. His name was Francesco Cirillo, I think. And this is breaking your work time down into short-timed intervals, which he calls Pomodoro. And Pomodoro is Italian for tomato, and the reason it's called that is because you got a little tomato timer, as you can see on the screen right now. But the idea is that you break your time into 25-minute segments. So as humans, we have a hard time focusing on a certain task for a long period of time unless we're really into it. So what Pomodoro allows us to do is say we're going to focus on this task for 25 minutes, and after this 25 minutes, you get a 5-minute break. So we're able to focus in or hone in on being able to actually do something because we have such a short period of time. Anyone can commit to 25 minutes during their workday to do some type of project. And being able to do that really helps move things forward. So Pomodoro is, it helps out a lot with focus. It also helps with estimating how long it's going to take you have you do something, because we oftentimes say, oh, that'll take an hour, that'll take 2 hours, but we don't really have any sense for how long it's actually going to take us. And usually we underestimate on the amount of time that a particular task is going to take us. And when we do that, we feel even more unproductive because we say it's going to take an hour, but then it ends up taking an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we have to push everything else down on our to-do list. If you get into the habit of using Pomodoro on a regular basis, you can track it and you can see how long it takes you to do regular tasks that you do on a regular basis. So it's really great. It also helps fight distractions. When you know you're going to have to work all day long, you have all day to work on this project, and you also have all day to procrastinate on this project too. But as soon as you set this timer for 25 minutes, it hones in what you're actually going to do. So it helps out quite a bit for that. And I've had varying success with this. I kind of go back to it occasionally and I try it out. You really have to be pretty focused if you do it. You don't have to have a specific kitchen timer for it. There's tons of apps out there if you Google Pomodoro, or you can bring it up right on your computer screen. It's nice. I use it mainly if I have a deadline to work under and I really need to focus on something. That's when I'll start timing everything that I need to do. Next productivity method is the action method, and this is the idea that there are too many ideas and not enough action. And action method was actually called a software at one point, and they did away with it, and now it's more of a method that can be adopted. And this is the idea that every time you leave an event, a meeting, a brainstorming session, whatever it is, you have a clear set of action items. So you have a list of things that need to be done, because after a lot of the meetings that we go to, at least in my world that I go to meetings here, we have meetings and we talk about stuff, but it never really transitions into a clear, this is what you have to do next, or these are the next action items that you need to do, or who's responsible for these items as well. I do another presentation where I really like to talk about meetings and how to effectively run meetings, and this is something that I talk about quite a bit, is in order for your meeting to be productive and the aftermath of your meeting to be productive, you really need to have a clear sense of what everybody is walking away with and what they need to do and by when. So this is just a clear view of everything that you need to accomplish from whatever meeting that you had. Next one, MIT. This is pretty easy. It's the most important things, because realistically, you're probably not going to accomplish everything that is on your to-do list every day. And oftentimes we'll have that list sitting next to us and we'll feel pretty bad when we can only check off 1, 2, maybe 3 items on that list. But the idea of trying to accomplish your entire to-do list in a day isn't really practical. And what the most important things list does is it's the top three things that will make today a success. So in the morning you sit down and you say, these 3 things are what it's going to make me most successful today. This is what I would count this day as a success if I complete these 3 items. I like to write them the night before just because I like to kind of reflect and think about what I have to do the next day, but these could be any of your tasks that lead up to a project. Again, an entire project is not a task. These are the smaller items. It could be something as easy as clean out my inbox, okay? Maybe your email inbox or something like that. It could be just a portion of a project. It could be a meeting, whatever it is. 3 things that you can manageably do today that you can cross off your list. And once those are off your list, everything else is just candy from that. So accomplish those 3 things, and then it's whatever you need to do to make a success, with just the understanding that you're not going to be able to accomplish everything on your list every single day, but at least do 3 of them. So that's what the most important things, list of 3. And also, I'll post these slides as well so you guys can take a look at them. There isn't a lot of information on them because I don't like to cram a lot of bullets onto my slides, but it's a good kind of refresher so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. The last pre-formatted productivity method that I like to talk about, mainly because some people really like it. I'm not a big fan of it, but I know it's changed the way a few people kind of work with their to-do lists, and it's called the Anti-To-Do List. And this was Mark Anderson's. He created Netscape. Remember that one, that browser, a long time ago? And his big question is, do you ever feel disappointed at the end of a busy day when you look at your to-do list and you didn't cross anything off? His idea is stop tracking what you're going to do and track what you did. So every time you accomplish a task or you are able to successfully say, this is what I did, you write it down on a list. I have a really hard time keeping track of my action items this way, but I know some people who are just naturally really heavy hitters when they walk into the office and they can just pound a bunch of stuff out really quickly. This works much better for them, so they can track what they did. And then at the end of the day, they kind of review it against their goals for the month, the week, whatever it was, to see if they actually were able to accomplish that. And it's nice to use this approach to build a little bit of momentum, because as you write down what you have done, it helps you get into that mindset that you want to create more, you want to produce more, you want to be able to move forward in whatever projects you have. So those were the pre-formatted methods, and I went through those pretty quickly, again, because there's so much information about those ideas online. One place that I go to a lot to find information about these is Lifehacker. Some of you may know that one. It's lifehacker.com. There's also a bunch of other productivity/business websites that work really well. Inc.com is another one. Forbes has a lot of good information on pre-formatted productivity stuff. And at this point, Rebecca, are there any questions that people had that you want me to run through?
I haven't seen any questions come through the chat box, so I thought I would ask a question while we see if anyone has something they want to add. I was wondering, when you were talking about when you were saying if something is actionable or not, you had the 3 categories of trash, someday maybe, and the reference list. What's the reference list?
So that's something like if I go to a presentation and I get a handout, or if I get slides or something like that, that becomes reference material for me that I may want to refer back to in the future. So I have a separate folder where I keep all that stuff that I collect, that it's just called reference material, and it's on the computer so I can search it as needed. But I sat through that really awesome library law presentation that you did, Rebecca, and I actually have that bookmarked under reference material, and I click on it kind of frequently to see all the notes that I took down while you were talking. So it's nothing that I need to do or take care of. It's just something that I'm going to hold on to because I can use it for future reference.
Cool,
so that's essentially what it's going for. That's
really helpful. Thank you. We do have one question now. If you have any tips for managing the torrent of email?
Okay, so zero inbox is one of those big ideas that I didn't put in here because that's kind of a whole presentation all in its own, but what I recommend for helping out with all the email that comes in for people, the first thing I say is go through and unsubscribe from every list that you have that you're subscribed to. And oftentimes we get a lot of email that comes in that's from listservs, it's from stuff that we've signed up for, it's from, oh yeah, Jeremy just posted except for Nyla. Now, if it's something that's really important to you, don't unsubscribe from it, but if it's something that you constantly see yourself deleting, then it's something to, and Rebecca says except for the Mid-Hudson Library System lists. Okay, so we have a lot of, we'll make a list of things that you can't unsubscribe from. But listservs generate a lot of email, especially when that reply all action starts to take place. If you're getting a lot of email from certain places, like if in your library, if your library is just generating a ton of internal staff email, that can sometimes be problematic in terms of communication, and that's more of a culture shift that you need to do in the organization. And to make it less of a email type communicating area. And when it comes to email, I always say that I like it when email is used for quick communication, so it should be 5 lines, 5 sentences or less, and you should never communicate new projects through email. So if it's a big chunk of information that you need to communicate, that's much better off as a phone call rather than an email to somebody. So to manage a lot of incoming mail, it depends a lot on what it is, and you kind of have to look at what the bulk of your mail is and then deal with that, and then you look at what the second bulk of email is and you deal with that. Usually it's stuff from subscribed lists, and then it comes from internally your own organization. And generally, I also really like to see people not use their inbox as a to-do list. Whenever email comes in, people will see it, and then they'll kind of save it in there until they can do a little action on it. But when I sit down during the day, there's usually 2 or 3 times during the day where I check my email, and I sit down and with intention I check through and I go through it, because kind of what we do is we sit down and we will just check our email quickly to see if there's anything important that has happened, but we won't process any of it, and then we'll go back to it later, and we'll kind of get in the habit of just kind of glancing at it, and if something catches our eye, we'll do it, but we'll leave a lot of that stuff in there, and then it'll start to build up. but 2 to 3 times a day, sit down and intentionally go through your email, and this is processing that in basket that we were talking about earlier with David Allen. So when you see an email, if you can do an action on it in 2 minutes or less, you're going to do it. If it's a project, then you need to put it on your task list that you're going to do, and you can put this in a folder that says reply to later or whatever. But being able to say, my email's not an inbox, and I'm going to process everything that comes in, and that's whether you're deleting it, you're delegating it, you're creating a project out of it, whatever you need to do is intentionally doing that action rather than just kind of letting it build up.
I think that's a great tip, right? Because if they're just floating in, you're getting distracted by the easy stuff sometimes, which is what you warned against, that it would be easy to do this right now instead of distracting you from your big goals or your top 3 successes for the day. So Ron, I don't see any other questions coming in through the chat, so I think you could continue on if you'd like.
Awesome. So next one is I'm going to talk about some productive habits that you can put into place to help you out a little bit as you're moving forward. And we can say we want to be productive, but odds are you won't unless you change your current working environment. And the first one that I talk about quite a bit in terms of habits is setting goals. And I talk about setting goals in just about every presentation that I do because I think it's very, very important. Whatever you're doing in any aspect of your life, I think you should have some type of goal that you're working towards. Otherwise, what's the point, really? And busy people have lots of goals, but productive people have very few that they work on regularly. And by goals, I don't mean those big, lofty ones where, if you're talking personally, I want to lose weight. Okay, that's not a goal. That's an aspiration. That's what you want to do in the future, but you don't have any clear steps on how you're going to do that. I want to lose 10 pounds by June. That's a very specific goal, and it's very measurable. Because I often talk about SMART goals when I talk about goals. That's specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. So write down your biggest goals and your aspirations and then break those down into smaller steps that you can do. So it's very productive to have an idea of what you can do and what you can't do, and then a timeline when you're going to be able to create it. So first habit, setting goals, very important. Second habit, I talk about lists a lot because I like them a lot, whether it's a to-do list, whether it's a list of how your morning routine, whatever it is, lists are pretty important because it helps you visualize your goals as a whole and what you need to do and the action items that are associated with your goals. And by action items, I just mean those small tasks that you need to do to move forward. There's an awesome book called Checklist Manifesto that goes into this in quite a bit of detail. I highly recommend that book. It's really short. It's an easy read. But it talks about the importance of checklists and how it's radically changed NASA being able to have lists in place, and same with certain healthcare systems. Just being able to check off and say, we've done this, we did this, we still need to do this. Keeps people honest about productivity, and also when you cross something off a list, there's a shot of there's a shot of dopamine that's released into your brain, and it makes you feel pretty good. That's why when we write our to-do lists, and then if we do something later in the day that it wasn't actually on our to-do list, we write it down just so we can cross it off, right? So any type of crossing off that you can do on these lists is really great because it helps build that momentum to keep going forward and accomplish more. I talked about capturing earlier in David Allen's method, and that is more talking about the internal capturing, so kind of the head. I talked a little bit about external capturing, but this is what I mean here is always capture everything always. Again, the brain is a great machine but memory isn't really the best or the most reliable tool, and it's really great to start saving your thoughts, and it will help you out significantly. A lot of people do this in a bunch of different ways. Some people use Postit Notes whenever something's mentioned to them. Journaling is really big, and it's very popular, and there's a lot of science that backs up just having a daily journal where you're capturing just your ongoing thoughts throughout the day, or maybe just at the end of the day. It helps build that elasticity through your brain, and it also helps you remember a lot more stuff in the future because you learn how to pay attention to what's actually happening rather than being bombarded by all the external stimuli that we have. Brian Tracy wrote a book called Eat That Frog. It was really popular a few years ago. You may have read this one, but this is the idea that when you get to work in the morning, or if it's your day off and you have projects to do, you do the most complicated, dreaded task first. And the idea behind that is after you concentrate on one of the larger tasks and you finish it, it builds momentum and it makes everything else the rest of the day a little bit easier. And his idea is that if you had to eat a frog, if today you had to eat a frog, when would you want to do it? Would you want to do it in the morning and get it out of the way, or would you want to do it tonight and you'd have to worry about it all day long about having to eat that frog? So his idea is eat it in the morning, and then the rest of the day is going to be a whole lot easier. So get that complicated stuff out of the way immediately. And this isn't all your complicated stuff. This is assigning just a frog that you have to take care of maybe daily, maybe monthly. So early on in the month you want to tackle it so you don't have to worry about it as much later on. The next one's monotasking. So at this point in the presentation, I usually ask, how many people feel like they're good multitaskers? So you can go ahead and raise your hand. I can't see you, but you can raise your hand. And I'm going to guess that probably, I don't know, like maybe, what do we got, 35? I bet like 10 of you would have raised your hand saying that you're good multitaskers. And when you claim that you're a good multitasker, you're actually lying, because we are not good multitaskers as humans, because what multitasking is being able to do two tasks simultaneously. And our brains cannot do that. So our brains can focus on one thing, and then it can switch its focus relatively quickly to another item, so we can look like we're multitasking, but the transition time that it takes from doing one task to another task, you lose a little bit of your focus, a little bit of your concentration, and it makes things go a little bit longer, and it works much slower in terms of production. And monotasking is one thing that a lot of productivity gurus talk about, because it helps with focus. And this is a big one that you really need to do to get through. I'll talk about focus in just a second, but being able to focus on one task and follow it through to completion is much more productive, much more effective than having multiple things going at the same time. And I fall prey to multitasking kind of frequently. I have a lot of different tabs open on my computer. I'm trying to talk with my boss, but I'm also trying to write a report, and I'm checking my email and doing all kinds of things, and it makes everything you're doing a little bit less, so it doesn't add up to as much as it could. So being able to reevaluate and get one thing done well and then move on to your next task is really great when working through monotasking. And monotasking also leads into finding your flow. And there's a great book by a guy named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and the idea is when you're doing something and you're doing it and you really get into that moment, and we've all had these moments at one point in time where we focus on one task and we look at the clock and 3 hours have passed and we haven't even really known, and that's that flow state when we're so focused on an item or a task that time just seems to slip away. And this is our most effective and most productive state that we can get into, and you can't get into this state if you're multitasking. It's specifically something that you have to do with monotasking, and we've become masters of swiping away any micro activities, or we always want to check our cell phones, and it prevents ourselves from engaging deeply or thinking properly about certain items. So having the ability to focus on one item and eliminate the distractions that are around us can be very powerful in finding this flow state and being able to effectively accomplish what we need to accomplish. The next habit I have is say no. Now this one isn't always possible depending on what area you are in your library or your organization, because if your boss asks you to do something, you're probably going to have to do it. But just as kind of a life rule, saying no can help out quite a bit. And I don't take a hard stance on no. Usually I say it's better to say yes, but slowly. So whenever a new project, a new opportunity comes up, I used to do this a lot. If anything came up, I'd jump on it right away and I'd say, yes, I absolutely want to work on this. And what happens is your project list gets very, very big. And like I said earlier, when busy people have a lot of priorities and productive people have very few. So when new items come in and you start to look at all of your priorities in general, you really have to, as new projects come in, you really have to decide, is this something that you want to work on? Is this a priority for you? What else is going to suffer if you say yes to this? And sometimes I've gotten into certain situations where I've taken on a project and I know once I start working on it that I'm not going to be able to put my full effort into it because I have far too many priorities in other areas. And in that case, it's time to jump ship and say that you're not going to be able to do it at this time. It may still be a priority of yours, but it's something that you have to push a little bit later. Because saying yes to every project that comes along breaks your life into a million little pieces, and it's hard with that much surface area to actually create anything, and that's when you fall into those multitasking traps, or where you can't put as many, you can't properly list your priorities and what you actually need to do. So I advocate for saying no if it's not something that's a true priority in your life or something that you don't really want to work on, rather than just blanket saying yes to everything that comes along. If you're new to the career, if you're new to your career in library science, or if you're new to any type of career, or if you're new to your organization, sometimes saying yes regularly can help out because you take on a lot of responsibility and you're able to kind of climb the ladder of responsibility up relatively quickly. But as we start to get kind of set in our ways and as we start to work on projects that we really care about, sometimes it's not as easy to take something on without losing something else or having something else suffer because of it. So that's what I mean by say no or say yes slowly. Next habit is reflect on mistakes. So this is something that it took me a long time to learn how to do because we have a culture where we don't really like to talk about failures at all, and being able to reflect on anything, maybe it did go well and there's just a few things that were hiccups along the way, but once you finish a project, being able to look back, or a task, being able to look back and write down 3 things that went wrong and how you plan to fix them for future projects can be pretty powerful. It's going to make you more productive as you go forward in what you're working on. So, and they don't necessarily have to be big mistakes, and it could be just little things. If a project completely failed and you have your walk of shame and it's too bad, that's fine. If you just have to look back on it and why did this project fail, and make sure you understand the core cause of its failure, and then for future projects you can just apply that solution to be able to move forward with it. So reflecting on mistakes. The next habit, so I had this one in tools, and I always kind of jump back and forth whether it's a tool or whether it's a habit, because it's kind of both. And your calendar, I think, is one of the best habits you can get into using, but it's also one of your strongest tools that you have for productivity, because it provides a hard landscape for everything that you're doing. And this, as David Allen would say, is one of your inboxes, because essentially whenever you have a meeting, a task, anything that has a deadline, you're going to put it in your calendar, and being able to look at the month view, the week view of your calendar, and having an idea of what's coming up and being able to plan effectively for that is a really great habit to get into, and your calendar can be a great tool to be able to do that. With digital calendars, I love to search and move things around, invite people to stuff, and color code each thing. I have a rainbow of colors on my calendar. I have one for work, personal life, wife's calendar, boss's calendar, my school calendar. Everything is in there as a different color, and then I can click on, I really need to focus on what's happening at work right now and just my tasks, so I can only see that one. But some people really like the paper calendars, and those work out fine too. It's whatever your preference is for that. Another tool when it comes along, or another habit when it comes along to calendars, is time boxing. And this is something that can be a little uncomfortable at first, but this is the idea of scheduling tasks, especially everyday tasks that you have to do. So if you were going to meet with me and we were going to talk about something, you would put it in your calendar, meeting with Ron. And advocate for doing the same thing with projects or tasks. So if you know this task is going to take several hours to do, put it in your calendar and have an appointment with that task. So it's not another person, but you're setting that time aside where you can focus, you can monotask, you can get into that flow state, and you know it's on that calendar, so it's not really changing time. It doesn't really work out well when we say, here's our to-do list, but we don't necessarily put it on, we don't have a time when we're going to do it, we're just going to do it today. If I called Rebecca and say, hey, I have a meeting with you, I want to meet with you tomorrow, but I don't have a set time, then it's not really going to work out very well. So the same idea goes for any type of larger projects, any type of task, being able to schedule it in your day for a couple hours where you just sit down, you work on that item, and then you move on to something else. I don't think you should fill your day with working like this, because we'll get pretty tired if we just work on one big project after another in our schedule. But if you do it once or twice a day throughout your week, a couple days a week, it can be a really great way to approach a deadline and also complete a project in a timely way. And this is essentially planning your workout and working your plan. Definitely holds you accountable. And no matter how good your intentions are to accomplish a task in a day, there's always those setbacks. But if you have it scheduled out, it works out a lot better. Now, we work desk shifts and everything else, and we can't necessarily plan on accomplishing certain tasks throughout times of our day. But part of this is identifying times of the day where we have downtime and we can work on something specifically. Next habit is deadlines. Most people have a love-hate relationship with deadlines, and I love deadlines most of the time because it tells me it sets the task for completion. And I'm really big into project management, and a project's a temporary endeavor that has clear starting and end points. And I really like that because it basically says you have this thing to think about, to be concerned about, to worry about, but after this date, you won't have to worry about it anymore. Whether it's done or not, this is when it needs to be done by, and this is what you're aiming for. So what I like to do with deadlines is I have it on my calendar and then I work backwards. So I have an idea for how long whatever task is going to take me, and I say, okay, this is probably going to take me 6 hours to complete. And then I can work back from that deadline, and I can schedule 6 hours. Usually you're going to want to do a little more than that because you're going to get interruptions, things are going to happen. But you schedule your time where you're going to work on this project, and then you have plenty of time to hit your deadline. It helps increase focus knowing when your deadlines are, and don't be afraid of deadlines because it's basically a tool that people give you. If they say do this, if your boss gives you something to do, but they don't give you a set deadline or when it needs to be completed by, that's one of the worst things that can happen, because then it's just going to kind of float out there, and it's going to lower on your list of priorities, because one big part of priority is things that you want to do, things that you should do, things that align with your goals, your organization goals, but another part of setting priorities is when is it due. So having deadlines is pretty important for moving forward. And the next one is make it personal. So if I really love using an online calendar, but an online calendar doesn't work for you, then don't use it. Try something different. If getting things done doesn't resonate with you personally and you don't think you can follow all 5 steps, maybe try something a little bit different. If you don't like working in 25-minute increments, then Pomodoro probably isn't going to be the best thing for you. If you're on desk quite frequently, maybe scheduling things, time boxing isn't going to be the best. So you really have to figure out which productivity tool works best with your situation and in your life. So that's a big thing. And this is the end of the habit section. So Rebecca, do we have any questions that came up through that part?
We do. We have a question from Elizabeth, and she asks, how can you manage completing a task when patrons have reference questions? I tend to focus on patrons, and my project ends in a pile for the next day to get done.
Sure. So that's a big one when it comes to anyone who works on a desk. And usually what I would recommend is if you are the boss, then you can talk about with yourself about how to best handle this. But if you're not the boss, one big thing is if your projects constantly are not being completed and the only time you have to work on them is desk time, then it's time to have that conversation where you may tell your boss, look, I have this stuff to complete, and the patrons are the priority, and I'm either going to need more time on completing this project, or I'm going to need some off-desk time or closed-door time or something where I'm going to be able to handle this. Because when I was talking about multitasking earlier, that's essentially what it is, and we are in the customer service business, and when somebody does approach the desk, you don't have the opportunity to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't talk with you right now, I'm working on this project. So that's not an option. The only option you really have is work on it in small increments or break it up in small pieces so it takes a little bit less time to accomplish each area of the project, or talking to somebody, a superior, a boss, whatever, about helping you figure out when is the best time that you're going to be able to accomplish this. And this is a radical thing. Most libraries have operated for a long time by saying you're going to work the desk and you're going to do this while you're on desk and help the patrons as they come up. And that's not really conducive to a productive environment. So it's one of those conversations that you do have to have. And it can be a difficult conversation, but there isn't really any magical way that you can accomplish a task if you have constant interruptions, unless it's extending that deadline or having that conversation about priorities. And if this is something that actually needs to be completed, you'll need off-desk time to do it in a timely manner.
Excellent.
And then if you do have that conversation, then you actually need to make sure that you accomplish it with that off-desk time and you're not using it for something else, too. That's a big part of it. I've seen some people who said, oh, yeah, Ron, that's good advice. I went and talked to my boss, and they gave me the time, and I actually just went off and I worked the circulation desk instead of the reference desk or something like that. So once you have that time set aside, you really need to dedicate it to that project.
And that kind of leads us to our next question from Donna. How do you deal with a tendency to procrastinate?
Oh, procrastination. That's terrible. So it depends a lot on the person, and I'm a big procrastinator on certain things. If I really care about what I'm working on, I just get it done. It's usually those things that I don't really care about or I don't really want to do, and that's usually what happens. And the best way to fight that procrastination is to, first off, when you know you're procrastinating on something specific, it's time to break that down into smaller pieces, because not having a clear sense of what you have to do next is what starts procrastination. So if you have, like I said earlier, a project, so I have strategic planning for the Geneva Library. That's a huge project, and I can procrastinate on that for a while because I don't really know what the next step is. But as soon as I sit down and I say, all right, for 5 minutes, I'm just going to figure out what I'm going to do next. And once I am able to do that and I break it down into smaller parts, so I need to put a survey together, I need to write some focus group questions, I need to talk to the director about community conversations, and I need to put together a report about this. Once you have those smaller subtasks, it's a lot easier to move forward, and it's a lot less likely that you will procrastinate on it. Another thing that you can do for procrastination is basically just say, I'm going to sit down and force myself to work on this for 5 minutes. And when you do that and you set a timer for 5 minutes, what you'll see is the procrastination is usually the feeling you have about the item. And once you actually get into it and you start working on it, you'll see that procrastination kind of float away, because the right or left side of your brain, depending on the activity, whether it's creative or logical, will start to be engaged, and then you'll be more apt to continue on doing it. So procrastination is just that part, and if you can make it very easy to start it, then it makes it much better at warding off procrastination. If you're naturally prone to procrastination, then that's something you'll have to keep doing. So just saying, I'm going to start with 5 minutes working on this and then start rolling with it, or it could potentially change how you interact with your work itself. Also, doing the planning out your week can be very helpful for procrastination too, because you know that you have to accomplish these tasks at these specific times before you can move forward with anything else. So those are just a couple ways that I would handle my own procrastination if it was on something specific.
Those are great tips, Ron. I have to say there's no more questions, so you can keep going if you'd like.
Cool. Sounds good to me. The next section that I want to talk about is cool tools, and this is the fun part. So these are a bunch of different tools that people can use to help out their productivity. And there's a handful of them that I like that I'll talk about. Some of them that work out okay that I'm not a huge fan of. But the first one I want to talk about is Evernote, and this is pretty much the poster child for ubiquitous capturing. Evernote, there's an online app, there is a mobile app that you can use. You can take pictures of stuff, you can write notes, you can organize everything into cute little notebooks. And a lot of people say this is what it is. This is productivity in a nutshell. It's just use Evernote and everything will be fine. I have a hard time gaining traction on Evernote, and I put a lot of stuff in there, but things can sometimes become a little hidden, and I really need to have something in my face in order to work on it. That's another procrastination issue that I deal with, is if I'm not looking at it at any given time, I'll forget all about it, and then I won't bother doing it. So if I can't see it or if it's buried, it doesn't really work out very well for me. But a lot of people love Evernote. They have a intro edition that's free, and you can keep using the free one. They also have premium that allows you to do some other stuff with it, like chat in it, present, things like that. But Evernote's a pretty popular one that people like to use. The next one that I like to talk about is Google Keep. I just realized this photo is really blurry, but Google Keep is, and after you hear me talk for a while, you'll kind of realize that I'm a huge Google fanboy, and I use it for a lot of different things. But Google Keep is essentially a stack of Postit Notes you can use on your computer, on your phone, whatever, and it's meant for putting together small little notes. You can have bigger ones, you can have lists, you can have checklists on there, but just think about it as this is a digital Post-it note, and you can use it to do whatever you need. Also, you can have pictures associated with your notes. You can transcribe notes with your voice. It has OCR image to text, so if you take a picture of some text, it'll digitize it for you. With limitations, but it works out okay. It has reminders, and you can also color code notes. What I use this for is I have a lot of things that I need to do maybe on a weekly or a monthly basis that I need to be reminded of, and I'll put it in here just to remind me if it has a little more, if it needs a little bit more description or something that I don't want to have in my calendar. I'll use it for that, or if I'm just walking around and I have an idea, I'll pull out Google Keep real quick and I'll just jot a note, and then I'll process it a little bit later and put it where it needs to go. So I really like Google Keep. It works out pretty well, not for overall productivity, but just kind of one of those in baskets that David Allen was talking about earlier. Next one's Trello. This is kind of going along the same line as digital Post-its. It's kind of like Google Keep, but it has quite a few more features to it. And you create boards, and you can have where it says basic, intermediate, advanced along the top. You can make those different projects, and you can put notes on them. You can put tasks list on them. You can share them with people. So this is a good way if you're kind of a visual person to track your projects. Again, this one's free as well. So far, everything I've talked about has been free. And you can sign up for it and give it a shot to see if you like it. It works okay. I've used it for a couple projects, and I'm not in love with it, but it does its job fairly well. So if you use Trello right now, or if you want to work on a project with somebody, Trello is one of those options that you do have that might work okay for you. Basecamp is another big one. You've probably heard of Basecamp before. A lot of larger consultants. Rebecca loves Trello and uses it regularly. That's great. And I see the links for all this stuff are put in the chat box too, so that's really cool. You guys can click on all of those and just create an account to try them out if you want. Basecamp is one of those ones you have to pay for this one. They used to have a free version, but now it costs a little bit of money. It works okay. It has this nifty calendar view in it, and it also has task lists, and you can use it with multiple people. We worked with a website consultant firm, and they used Basecamp, and it worked out okay. I'm not really willing to pay for it because I don't think it has all the features that I really care about in a productivity software, but it's okay, and if you use it, it works out pretty well. The next one is Asana, and I love Asana. This is really great. Rebecca's giggling right now.
Oh, sorry.
we that team Rebecca was talking about that I'm working with her on, we use Asana to keep track of everything that we were doing, and I'm a big fan of it, mainly because it's free, and two, you can share just about everything with your the people that you're working with, and when you create a task in Asana, you can also, if you look on the right side, you can create subtasks within each of those tasks, and you can create reminders. You can have conversations. It has a calendar view. It works really, really well in just helping solve things. You can put your meeting agendas in here. You can have full conversations, and you can assign tasks to different people. You can keep an eye on what people are accomplishing. It's just a really great way to move forward with any type of project, and I'm a big fan of it. Google Drive, like I said, I'm a Google fanboy, and Google Drive has a bunch of different features that you can use. One of them is just creating a Google Doc, and I call this the master planner, and this is one that I really, really like too, and I use it kind of regularly, where I put the date at the top of the page. I have whatever the schedule it is. I have my action items, my ideas, thoughts done, and then at the end of the day, everything just moves down, and I just put a new date at the top. So this is a really manual way to keep track of the stuff that you're working on, and it's nice because you have to touch and kind of manipulate just about everything that you have. Spreadsheets, and you can do the master planner as well as spreadsheets with Microsoft Office and Excel. I just like Google Drive because it's everywhere and I can use it. But spreadsheets are another big one. You can customize spreadsheets for certain task lists. If I create a timeline or a project plan for a library I'm working with on long-range planning, it's generally in the form of a spreadsheet that I can share with them so they can keep track of what they need to do and I can keep track of what I need to do. Kicking it old school with paper and pencil or pen, that's perfectly fine. Some people work a lot better with that. Bulletjournal.com is a really great resource for setting up a notebook with a specific way that you can track your tasks, your ideas, your projects, everything in there. And it sets it up so you have a table of contents at the beginning, and then you just track everything that you're working on as you're moving through. And you remember things a little bit better when you write them out, too. And Postit Notes, just like paper and pencil. I'm a big fan of Postit Notes. If you saw my computer screen right now, there's about 6 or 7 of them surrounding my computer screen, where these are just quick things that I know I'm going to check off my list today, or information that people gave me. So Postit Notes is another great tool that you can use. These are also great for any type of brainstorming session that you're using. Some people are just really pen and paper, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of people get the idea that productivity needs to be something high-tech and digital, and that's not necessarily the case. There's lots of stuff that you can do that will, low-tech wise or pen and paper wise, that can increase your productivity as long as you track it right and you treat it as a proper in-basket. So that was the end of that section. Do we have any questions, Rebecca? We're just about out of time, I see.
Yeah, no current questions in the chat box, Ron.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to keep going then. We're just about done. So your number one productivity tool, any idea what it is? Any thoughts? Throw it in the chat box real quick. Rebecca, any idea? My brain. Okay, wow. That's the closest anyone has ever got. It's really super corny. Your number one productivity tool is you, and how you interact with the various things that you have coming into your life. So when you talk about productivity, there isn't one magical tool, there isn't one magical habit, there isn't one magical method that's going to correct productivity for you. Essentially, what productivity is how we interact with the time that we have, the energy that we have, and the attention we're willing to give things. Now, we talked a little bit about time and attention, and those together can be pretty powerful things, but if we don't have the energy to do what we're working on, it doesn't really work very well. Or if we have attention and energy but we have no time, that's not really great either. So productivity is kind of a mixture of these three things. And this chart came from Chris Bailey. He did a Year of Productivity, just came out with a new book. I haven't read it yet because I didn't want to read it before giving a productivity talk, otherwise I would have wanted to change a lot of stuff. But this is the idea that everything we do with productivity falls into these three categories, and your job is to figure out how you're going to be able to balance these three categories. Now, with the method methods we talked about that can have a big impact on time, as well as the tools we talked about. And then attention, those also go into the methods and tools. But with energy, to manage your energy, because that's a huge part of productivity, it's probably one of the most boring things that we've heard. We always hear is you need to have your right eating, sleeping, and exercising. And right now I'm going to give you Ron's eat, sleep, and exercise plan that you can follow to be a little more productive. And it's super easy. You eat a crap ton of veggies. Hey Ron, can I have some chocolate cake? Sure, after you eat a crap ton of veggies. So just eating healthy, a little bit greener, that works out really well. Sleeping 7.5 to 8 hours a night and putting in 30 minutes of exercise every day. Okay, if you don't do these things already, this will drastically improve your productivity, mainly because of the effects it has on focus and just your energy level. So that's a huge part of any type of moving forward with productivity. Another one is get some headspace. This is something that's kind of popular in business culture right now, the idea of meditation and being able to live in the present moment and kind of eliminate the distracting thoughts that we have on a regular basis. And when I talk about meditation, I don't mean sitting on the floor and with the Om. I just mean being able to sit down for 5 minutes and focus on your breath, or focus on one thought or something that keeps you grounded. And I said get some headspace because there's a great app out there called Headspace that you can get a free foundational path of meditation where you can play around with it a little bit. Basically what it does is it hones in your brain so you're not always thinking about everything else, because living in the moment when you're doing a task or project, that monotasking idea, that idea of flow, is really important, not to have external but also internal conflicts or any internal distractions when you're worried about other things, and practicing a little bit of meditation can help out with that a lot. And finally, just understanding, this is the chart from Simon Sinek, his why talk, but just understanding why you're doing what you're doing can be really powerful for productivity, because again, if you don't have the right priority set or you don't know why you're doing something, that's going to lead into the procrastination and just not accomplishing something. So know your values, know what motivates you, and why you are doing what you are doing, so it can help you move forward to become a little bit more productive. And that's all I had for you. I shortened the talk from what I did at NYLA so it could fit into the hour, and it just did, which is great. But I'd love to take any questions that people have about productivity in general. Again, this was just a light view of a bunch of different productivity stuff that's out there. If you have any questions or you want to dig deeper into anything, you're definitely welcome to send me an email. I'd love to talk to anybody about productivity stuff that they want to hear about. Rebecca, do we have any questions at this point? I'm happy to stick around for a minute to see if anyone has anything they want to ask or comments that they have.
Currently, there's no questions in the chat box. Everyone, this is your chance. Any more questions for Ron?
Silence.
All right, cool. Well, you've got Ron's contact info, and I just would like to wrap up by saying thank you very much to Ron for his time and energy in this webinar this morning. He packed a lot of information into an hour in, I think, a very digestible way. I already feel more productive for having sat through the webinar. We're going to be sending everybody online evaluation of the program. We'd appreciate it if you'd fill that out and submit it. And we will be recording this, so we've got a recording coming your way, and Ron has promised the slides, so you'll have that backup info. But we just want to say thank you for attending today, and we hope this makes your 2016 awesome. Thanks,
Awesome.
Ron.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, thank you.